The wind howled across the forest like a living thing. It clawed at the trees, tore through the branches, and pushed the snow sideways in thick, blinding sheets. In the middle of that storm, Thomas Hale could barely see more than a few feet ahead. His cabin was warm, the fire steady, and he should have stayed inside. But something had pulled him to the window, a strange movement in the darkness. At first, he thought it was just the wind shaking a branch loose. But then, the shape moved again. It wasn't bending or snapping like wood, it was walking, slowly, struggling. Thomas narrowed his eyes, pressing his forehead to the cold glass. Whoever or whatever it was didn't move like a person. The shape was too thin, too tall, the shoulders oddly set. The snow swirled around it, hiding details, but one thing stood out: the eyes. They glowed faintly, like two dim lanterns in the dark. He stepped back from the window. A wild thought crossed his mind. Leave it. Don't get involved. Whatever it was, it didn't belong here. But then the shape stumbled, falling hard into the snow. "Damn it," Thomas muttered. Grabbing his coat and boots, the cold hit him like a wall when he opened the door. It stole his breath in seconds, and the snow stung his face like 1,000 tiny needles. He trudged forward, his boots sinking deep with each step. The figure lay half buried now, its body shaking violently. "Hey, can you hear me?" Thomas called out over the wind. There was no answer. He crouched beside it, brushing snow away from its face, and froze. The skin wasn't human. It was pale, blue, patterned with faint silver lines like frost over glass. The features were sharp but delicate, the eyes half closed but still glowing faintly. And the tears weren't liquid. They had frozen in place, turning into tiny crystals along the alien's cheeks. Thomas swallowed hard. He'd never seen anything like it. This wasn't just someone lost in the storm. This was something from far away. Something that shouldn't be here. Still, it was dying. "Come on, stay with me," Thomas said, sliding his arms under the figure and lifting. It was lighter than it looked, fragile and far too cold. As he carried it back, he felt the faintest whisper against his chest. "Don't send me back." The voice was strange, the accent unearthly, but the fear in it was the same as any living being's. Thomas pushed through the storm faster, his boots crunching in the snow, heart pounding harder than the wind. By the time he reached the cabin, his arms were numb from the cold and the weight. He kicked the door shut behind him and lowered the figure onto a thick rug by the fire. The alien's skin steamed faintly as the heat touched it. The frost on its face melted, but its breathing was still shallow, almost silent. Thomas grabbed blankets and wrapped them tight, his hands moving fast without thinking. Up close, the alien looked even more unusual. Its ears were thin and swept back. It's almost like they were built for listening in ways humans couldn't. Its fingers were long, ending in soft, translucent tips. Around its wrists were metal cuffs covered in frost. They weren't decorative, they looked like restraints. Thomas frowned, touching one of the cuffs. The alien's eyes flickered open. They were brighter now, but filled with pain. It flinched away, breathing faster. "You're safe here," Thomas said quietly. Not sure if the alien even understood him. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. The storm raged outside, but in the cabin, there was only the sound of the fire and the alien's ragged breaths. Thomas didn't know what kind of trouble this stranger had brought to his door. But he knew one thing: he couldn't put it back. Out there, somewhere in the back of his mind, he also knew that whatever had made those tears freeze in midair might still be out there, looking for it, and now they might come looking for him too. The alien closed its eyes again, but its lips moved. 2 words came out, barely louder than a whisper. "They're coming." Thomas sat back, the fire crackling. Beside them, his jaw tightened. Whoever they were, they'd have to come through him first. Outside, in the snow, a faint light moved between the trees. Asterisk, the storm still raged outside. But inside Thomas's cabin, the fire painted the walls in flickering orange. The alien lay still on the rug, wrapped in every blanket Thomas could find. The skin under the blue tint had lost its icy crust, but it was still colder than it should be. Thomas crouched nearby, unsure what else to do. He wasn't a doctor, and this wasn't even human. He didn't know if the same rules applied. Still, he kept feeding the fire, hoping the heat would work. Every now and then, he glanced at the window. Through the frosted glass, he thought he saw movement shadows sliding between the trees. He told himself it was just the wind. But in his gut, he knew better. A soft sound pulled his attention back to the alien. It had shifted slightly under the blankets, its head turning toward the fire. Its eyes blinked open, dim but aware. For the first time, Thomas saw the true color of them. Not just glowing, but a deep, shifting silver. Like liquid metal catching the light. "You're awake," Thomas said gently. The alien's lips moved, forming a sound that wasn't quite English. It tried again, and this time the words came through, broken and strained. "Not safe." "Here." Thomas leaned in. "You're safe for now. No one's getting through that storm." The alien shook its head weakly. "They follow. Always." Thomas frowned. "Who's they?" No answer, just a cough, sharp and painful. The alien's body trembled as if each breath took effort. Thomas grabbed a pot, filled it with water from the bucket, and set it over the fire. As it warmed, he found some of his winter clothes, thick socks, an old flannel shirt. He doubted. They'd fit perfectly, but anything was better than the thin, frost-covered clothing the alien wore. When the water was warm, he poured some into a mug and held it to the alien's lips. "Drink." At first, it hesitated, staring at the steam like it was something dangerous. But then, it took a sip. Thomas saw the change instantly. The alien's shoulders relaxed a fraction, and a bit of color returned to its face, though it was still faint. "Better?" he asked. The alien nodded once. Its voice was still quiet when it spoke again, but this time it was clearer. "Thank you, Eku." Thomas exhaled slowly. It was the first sign of trust, now that he could look closely without worrying the alien would. Stop breathing, he noticed other details. Its clothes were torn in places, singed along the edges. A faint, almost invisible scar ran down the side of its neck. And those cuffs, frozen metal, marked with strange geometric lines, were locked tight around its wrists. "What are these?" Thomas asked, touching one gently. The alien's reaction was instant. Its eyes widened, and it pulled its hands back under the blanket. "Prison," it said, voice trembling. "Not mine, not." Guilty. Thomas didn't know what kind of crime someone like this could be accused of, but the fear in its voice was real. "I'm Thomas," he said after a pause. "What should I call you?" The alien hesitated, as if deciding whether to share the truth. Then, softly, "Alran." Thomas nodded. "All right, Alran, you're safe here until you can walk again. We'll figure out the rest later." "Alran's?" Gaze lingered on him for a moment, as if trying to measure the weight of those words. Then, without warning, it reached a trembling hand toward the fire. Not close enough to touch the flames, but close enough to feel the heat. Thomas noticed something strange. The silver lines in Alran's skin seemed to brighten slightly, pulsing faintly, like veins carrying light instead of blood. It was the first real sign of life since Thomas had dragged him inside. The moment was interrupted by a sound outside. A low, mechanical hum, distant but growing. It wasn't the wind, it had rhythm, a steady pulse, like an engine running somewhere beyond the trees. Thomas's jaw tightened. He moved to the window and peered out. Oh, wait. The storm made visibility poor. But through the wall of snow, he thought he saw something faint blue lights moving between the pines. Not lanterns, not headlights. Something else. When he turned back, Alrin was staring at the same window, eyes wide with recognition. "They," he whispered, voice breaking. "They come." Thomas grabbed his rifle from the wall, the old bolt-action his father had left him. Against whatever was out there, it might not mean much, but it was something. He knelt beside Alrin. "Again, can you walk?" Alrin shook his head weakly. "No, not yet." Thomas nodded once, decision made. "Then you stay here. Stay quiet. I'll deal with whoever's outside." But Alrin caught his wrist before he could stand. The alien's fingers were cold, but strong. "If they see me here, you die too." Thomas looked him in the eye. "Then I guess I better make sure they don't see you." The hum outside grew louder. Somewhere in the trees, a faint flash lit the snow. And for the first time since the night began, Thomas felt the cabin walls weren't enough to keep the storm or the danger out. The hum outside rose and fell like a heartbeat, steady but unnatural. It wasn't a sound the forest should make, not in the dead of winter. Thomas stayed by the window, his breath fogging the cold glass, trying to see through the swirling snow. Shapes moved between the pines, too smooth, too deliberate to be wind-blown branches. Blue lights pulsed faintly, not strong enough to illuminate much, but enough to make the snow flash in eerie bursts. Alrin sat up slightly, leaning on one elbow. His silver eyes locked on the moving shapes, his breathing sharp and uneven. "Not human," he said, voice almost a growl. "I figured," Thomas muttered. He stepped away from the window, checking the rifle. It was loaded, but against whatever was out there, a few bullets wouldn't be much. Still, it was better than nothing. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls thinner. The fire popped loudly in the silence, each crack sounding too sharp. Outside, the hum slowed, then stopped completely. That made Thomas more uneasy than the sound itself. "Why are they after you?" Thomas asked quietly, keeping his voice low, even though the storm should have swallowed it. Alrin didn't answer right away. His gaze flickered to the metal cuffs still around his wrists. "Because I left," he said finally. "I saw things. New things. They would rather I disappear." Thomas didn't press for details. He could tell Alrin was holding back more than he said. But whatever those things were, they were important enough for these hunters to cross space or whatever distance to find him. A sudden thud against the cabin wall made both of them flinch. It wasn't a knock. It was heavy, deliberate, like something large had landed just outside. Thomas moved silently to the door, pressing his ear to the wood. At first, nothing. Then scraping. Slow, careful scraping, as if claws or metal were dragging along the wood. Alrin's voice cut through the quiet. "Do not open." Thomas turned his head. "I wasn't planning to." But curiosity pulled at him. He edged to the side window, pushing the curtain back just a sliver. His stomach tightened. Something was out there, crouched low in the snow. Its shape was humanoid, but the limbs were too long, bending in wrong angles. Its body was covered in a smooth, dark material that gleamed faintly under the dim, light-like armor, but more organic. And where a face should have been, there was only a smooth plate. Glowing faintly with thin blue lines, it was scanning the cabin. Thomas let the curtain fall and stepped back. "Yeah, they're not here for tea." The alien outside moved away from the wall, and for a moment Thomas thought it had left. Then came another sound-faint tapping, like fingertips on glass. His eyes darted to the other side of the cabin. One of the shapes was at the opposite window, its glowing faceplate, inches from the glass. The blue lines pulsed in a strange rhythm, almost like breathing. Alrin's voice was tight. "They are reading heat. They know someone is inside." Thomas glanced at the fire. The warmth that had been keeping Alrin alive was now a beacon for their hunters. Can they break in? Thomas asked. Yes, Alrin said without hesitation. But they like to wait first, to see if prey will run. Thomas's jaw tightened. So we're prey now. Before Alrin could answer, a deep, metallic thump echoed from the roof. Snow fell past the windows in a sudden sheet. Something was up there, its weight pressing into the beams above them. Thomas moved quickly to the corner, grabbing the thickest coat he had. If they're expecting us to run, maybe we should. Alrin shook his head. I can't. Not far. Then we make it far enough, Thomas said, his tone final. He looked around the cabin, already planning. The back door led into thicker woods, away from the main trail. The storm was still raging enough to hide their tracks for a while. The roof groaned again, as if whatever was up there was shifting position. Then came another sound, low and guttural, but not like an animal. This was controlled, intentional. It sent a cold shiver through Thomas's spine. They're calling to each other, Alrin said quietly. Thomas slung the rifle over his shoulder, then pulled Alrin's arm over his own. The alien was weak, but he could still stand with help. We go now. Before they decide, waiting is over. They moved to the back door. Thomas opened it slowly, and the wind rushed in, biting at his face. Snow swirled into the cabin, stinging his skin. He stepped out first, scanning the tree line. No movement, but he didn't trust the quiet. Behind him, Alrin's silver eyes darted around, searching the shadows. They are close, he whispered. Then stay close to me, Thomas replied. They stepped into the storm, the snow swallowing their tracks almost instantly. Behind them, the cabin stood warm and glowing, an open invitation for the hunters to follow. The hum started again, low and steady, and this time it was behind them. The snow was thick enough to hide their footprints. Within seconds, Thomas led Alrin through the narrow animal trails he knew well, using the storm as cover. The wind howled in their ears, drowning out most sounds, but Thomas kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see the faint blue glow of their pursuers breaking through the white wall. They reached a small rock overhang, half buried in snow. It wasn't much, but it blocked some of the wind. Thomas guided Alrin under it, setting him down on a flat patch where the snow hadn't piled up completely. Alrin's chest rose and fell quickly. His silver eyes were dimmer now, and his voice shook when he spoke. They will not stop. Thomas crouched beside him. You've said that before. But why? What's so important that they'd follow you through a storm like this? For a long moment, Alrin didn't answer. His gaze drifted away, as if looking at something far in the past. Snowflakes clung to his pale blue skin, melting slowly in the faint warmth of his breath. I was one of them, he said finally. Thomas's brow furrowed. One of who? The enforcers, Alrin replied. We hunt, track, bring back those who break our laws. His voice was heavy, each word carrying a weight. For years, I followed orders. I believed they were right. That all we did was for safety. Thomas didn't interrupt. He could feel the rest coming, and it wasn't going to be light. But then, Alrin continued, his voice lowering. I was sent to a place not so different from this world. Cold, harsh. We were told the people there were dangerous. That they must be removed. But when we arrived, his voice broke slightly. They were not soldiers. They were families. Children. Felt his stomach tighten. What did you do? Alrin's eyes closed. I refused the order. I helped them escape, and in doing so, I became the hunted. Silence hung between them, filled only by the sound of the wind. That's why they want you back, Thomas said quietly. Alrin nodded. They do not forgive. They do not allow. Mercy. His gaze shifted to Thomas. You understand now? You have taken me in. That makes you part of this. Thomas didn't answer right away. He thought about the hunters moving through the snow, the glowing faceplates, the heavy steps on his cabin roof. He thought about the cuffs still locked around Alrin's wrists, and he thought about leaving him there in the storm earlier, and knew he'd made the only choice he could live with. We'll figure it out, Thomas said finally. But right now, we need to keep moving. This place isn't safe for long. Alrin hesitated, then nodded. His voice was softer when he spoke again. You should have left me. Humans would not be hunted if I were gone. Thomas almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. Too late for that. You're here now, and so am I. Guess we're both in it. Alrin's silver eyes studied him for a long moment, as if weighing the truth in his words. Then, slowly, he reached up and touched Thomas's chest right over his heart. Warm, he said quietly, as if testing the word. Your warmth is strange to me. Thomas wasn't sure if that was a compliment or just an observation, but the way Alrin said it felt different. Before he could respond, a faint vibration ran through the ground beneath them. It wasn't an earthquake. It was too precise, too controlled. A sound followed a distant but steady hum, growing louder. They've split up, Alrin said sharply. One comes from here. Others will circle. Thomas looked out from the overhang. The storm made visibility almost zero, but he knew. Alrin was right. Then we need to go, now. He helped Alrin to his feet again, feeling how light and weak the alien still was. The snow crunched under their boots as they pushed forward, deeper into the trees. After a few minutes, Thomas noticed something strange. The hum was gone, replaced by an almost complete silence. The kind that made the hair on his neck stand up. Why'd they stop? He muttered. Alrin's voice was grim. They are letting us move. To where they want us. Thomas tightened his grip on the rifle. Then we're not going where they want. They changed direction, angling toward a frozen stream Thomas knew would lead to an old hunting shack. It wasn't much, but it had 4 walls and a roof and, most importantly, it was far from any trail. But just as they reached the stream, a shape emerged from the snow ahead, tall, armored, faceplate glowing faint blue. The hunter tilted its head slowly, almost curious. Then, with a single smooth motion, it raised its arm and the air between them shimmered as something unseen charged with power. Thomas stepped forward, putting himself between Alrin and the weapon. Go, he said. Alrin's voice was sharp. You cannot fight. Go. Thomas barked. The hunter moved first. The shimmer in the air tightened into a thin line of light, stretching from the hunter's raised arm to the snow between them. It wasn't a gun knot in the human sense, but Thomas didn't need to know exactly what it was to feel the danger pouring off it. Move, he shouted, shoving Alrin toward the frozen stream. The beam fired. It didn't make a loud bang, just a sharp crack in the air, followed by the hiss of vaporized snow. Where it hit, the ice turned black and melted. In an instant, Thomas didn't look back again. He grabbed Alrin's arm and ran along the frozen stream, boots slipping on the slick surface. The wind tore at their clothes, and snow stung their faces. But the sound of heavy steps behind them was louder than the storm. They're faster in snow, Alrin warned between breaths. Thomas risked a glance over his shoulder. The hunter was closing the distance with long, effortless strides. Behind it, more shapes moved through the trees, 3, maybe 4, all with glowing blue faceplates cutting through the white. Great, Thomas muttered. Whole welcome parties here. Up ahead, the stream curved sharply. Thomas yanked. Al ran toward the bank, scrambling up the snowy slope. His lungs burned, but they couldn't stop. Not here. The trees thickened, giving them brief cover. Thomas dropped to one knee, lifting his rifle. Through the scope, the closest hunter's form wavered in the storm, but the blue glow made it easy to track. He fired. The shot cracked across the forest. The hunter staggered slightly, the impact leaving a dent in the smooth armor, but it didn't fall. Instead, it tilted its head as if surprised a human weapon had touched it at all. Then it came faster. "Run," Thomas barked. They moved again, weaving between trees. The sound of pursuit grew, not just from behind, but from the sides. The hunters were spreading out, boxing them in. Alrin stumbled, his legs trembling. Thomas caught him before he fell completely, slinging the alien's arm over his shoulder. Almost there, he lied. A sharp whine cut through the wind, a hunter's weapon charging again. Thomas dove behind a fallen log, dragging Alrin with him just as a beam tore through the air above, slicing the bark like paper. "They're hurting us," Thomas realized aloud. "Yes," Alrin said grimly, toward the ship. Thomas's head snapped toward him. "Ship, in theirs." Alrin nodded. "Hidden? Close. They will take me. And you will not return." Thomas clenched his jaw. He wasn't ready to end this night in some alien prison or worse. Not happening. Another beam cut into the snow nearby, sending a spray of ice into the air. Thomas grabbed a chunk of it and threw it toward the right, making it crash through the branches. A hunter immediately turned in that direction, its weapon tracking the sound. "Go left," Thomas whispered. They crawled low, using the fallen log as cover. Then broke into a sprint toward a small gap between two boulders. It was tight, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. The hunters were bigger, maybe too big to follow without slowing down. They pushed through, snow scraping against Thomas's coat. Alrin stumbled but managed to keep moving. Behind them, a hunter reached the gap and paused, its glowing faceplate flickering briefly before it stepped back. "Good," Thomas breathed. Bought us some time, but the victory was short. The hum returned, louder now, almost like the air itself was vibrating. The ground beneath their feet trembled slightly. A shadow passed overhead. Thomas looked up, and saw it. The ship? It was massive, black against the gray-white storm, its surface smooth and seamless. It hovered silently above the treetops, snow swirling violently in the air currents beneath it. Small blue lights dotted its underside, scanning the ground in slow, deliberate sweeps. Alrin's voice was flat with dread. "They have found us." One of the lights stopped moving, then focused directly on them. "Move," Thomas yelled. They ran again, but this time the forest itself seemed to work against them. The wind shifted, throwing snow into their eyes. The hum grew into a low roar, and a beam of light lanced down from the ship, cutting through the trees like a blade. Branches exploded into splinters, and the air smelled of burning sap. "They're not just taking you," Thomas shouted over the noise. "They're burning everything in the way." "They do not care," Alrin answered bitterly. The hunters on the ground closed in, their dark forms now visible through the storm. Thomas could see their long limbs moving with mechanical precision, their weapons glowing brighter. They were surrounded. Thomas pressed his back against a tree. Breathing hard, Alrin slumped beside him. His mind raced. There had to be a way out, some weakness. Then he remembered the frozen stream. If they could get back to it, "Can you still run?" he asked. Alrin's silver eyes met his. "For a short time, that's all we need." Thomas grabbed his arm again, pulling him into motion. The hunters moved to intercept, but the pair darted between them, using the trees as shields. The storm howled, the ship rumbled overhead, and the ground seemed to shake with every step. Behind them, a hunter's voice, cold and metallic, echoed through the snow. "You cannot run, human." Thomas didn't look back. "Watch me." The frozen stream came into sight through the swirling snow, its slick surface glistening under the faint light from the ship above. Thomas pushed harder, feeling Alrin stumble against him. The aliens? Weight was almost nothing, but each step grew slower, weaker. "Just a little more," Thomas urged. "We reach the stream. We've got a chance." Behind them, the hunters moved fast. No wasted effort, no sign of exhaustion. The hum of their weapons was steady now, a cold, mechanical heartbeat following in the storm. They slid down the bank, boots crunching into the icy surface. The stream was wide here, and the snow on top was thin, slick enough to send a man flying. If he lost his footing, Thomas half-dragged, half-carried Alrin across. Praying the hunters would hesitate to follow. They didn't. Dark shapes dropped onto the ice, their long limbs steady, even on the slippery surface. Blue light from their weapons cast faint glows across the snow, chasing Thomas like a predator's eyes in the dark. "Keep going." Thomas barked, even as his own breath burned in his chest. One of the hunters raised its arm. Thomas saw the shimmer too late. The beam fired, slicing across the ice just behind them. The stream hissed where the heat met frozen water, sending up a cloud of steam that briefly hid them from sight. Thomas used the moment. He spun, raised the rifle, and fired. The shot hit the lead hunter in the leg. This time, it staggered hard, one knee striking the ice. The alien's weapon arms swung wildly, firing into the snowbank and sending up an explosion of white powder. "Move," Thomas shouted, pulling Alrin toward the far bank. They scrambled up the slope, boots slipping on the loose snow. A beam tore into the ground beside Thomas, scorching the frozen earth. The smell of burned dirt and sap filled the air. Alrin stumbled, again nearly falling, but Thomas caught him under the arms and shoved him forward. "Don't stop." The hunters reached the far bank seconds later. One fired at the base of a tree, and the trunk exploded in a spray of splinters, crashing to the ground where Thomas had been a heartbeat before. "They will not tire," Alrin panted. "They will not stop." "Then we make them," Thomas said through clenched teeth. Ahead, the trees opened into a clearing where an old hunting shelter stood half-collapsed, its roof sagging under the weight of snow. It wasn't much, but it had 4 walls and, more importantly, a pile of dry wood. Inside from his last visit, Thomas dragged Alrin through the broken doorway. "Stay low," he ordered. The hunters were close now, too close for another run. Thomas dropped the rifle, grabbed the woodpile, and kicked over the rusted metal drum in the corner. He dumped the wood inside, hands moving fast. Alrin watched, confused. "Fire will not stop them." Thomas gave a sharp grin. "It's not for stopping them, it's for stopping us from freezing before we blow this place to hell." He pulled the small fuel can from his pack, emergency gear for long trips in the snow. He'd never planned to use it like this, but the hunters left him no choice. He splashed the fuel over the wood, the walls, and the snow just outside the doorway. The hum grew louder, 3 hunters closing in from different sides. "Now's the part where you trust me," Thomas said. Alrin's silver eyes narrowed. "But..." He nodded. Thomas lit a match. The flame flared, warm and bright, before he tossed it into the fuel-soaked wood. Fire roared to life instantly, heat flooding the small shelter. The hunters reached the clearing just as the flames climbed high. The snow beneath their feet melted, turning to slush that hissed and steamed. One stepped forward, weapon raised, then stopped, scanning the growing fire. Thomas grabbed Alrin and shoved open the back wall panola section he'd cut loose years ago for storing gear. They slipped out, crawling under the low roof and into the snow beyond. The hunters advanced on the shelter. Their sensors locked on the heat signature inside. They didn't see the two figures moving away in the shadow of the flames. The fire caught the roof, sending sparks into the sky. The heat warped the metal drum until it buckled on, then the small propane tank Thomas had left inside went off with a deafening boom. The blast ripped through the clearing, throwing snow and debris high into the air. Two hunters were caught in the edge of the explosion, their dark armor scorched and dented. The others scattered briefly, their precise formation breaking for the first time. "Now we run," Thomas said, pulling Alren to his feet. They moved fast, keeping low, weaving between trees while the hunters regrouped. The storm hit them, but the hum of pursuit soon returned, relentless. Alren stumbled again, his breath shallow. "I cannot go much farther." "You don't have to," Thomas said, pointing ahead. Through the storm, a faint light glimmered. "That's where we finish this." The faint light ahead flickered like a dying lantern, barely visible through the swirling snow. Thomas didn't know if it was safety or another trap, but he had nothing else to aim for. Alren's steps were growing weaker, his weight leaning heavier with each stride. "Almost there," Thomas whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was saying it for Alren or himself. The hum of the hunters was still behind them, but further now, slowed by the explosion at the shelter. Every second counted, but the snow was deep, and the cold bit hard through his coat. Finally, the trees broke open into a small clearing. At its center stood an old mountain weather station steel frame, high walls, and a heavy door. The place had been abandoned for years, but Thomas had helped a friend fix the locks last summer. The key was still in his pack. "Come on," Thomas urged, dragging Alren up the last few steps. He shoved the key into the frozen lock and twisted hard until it gave with a loud click. Inside, the air was stale and cold, but the walls were thick. The main room still had a metal stove and a pile of old blankets in the corner. Thomas shut the door and dropped the heavy latch into place. The silence after the storm's roar was deafening. Only their breathing filled the space. Tomas's deep and ragged, Alren's soft and uneven. Thomas helped him to the floor beside the stove. "Stay here, I'll get us heat." He worked quickly, stacking old wood inside the stove, striking a match and feeding the first flame until it caught. Soon, the metal began to warm, and the room filled with the faint glow of firelight. Alren's silver eyes opened halfway, reflecting the light. His voice was faint. "You brought me far." "Why?" Thomas knelt beside him. "Because I wasn't going to let you freeze to death on my doorstep, and because I've seen people hunted before. I'm done letting it happen." For a long moment, Alren didn't respond. Then, slowly, his cold fingers reached out and touched Thomas's hand. "Where I come from, warmth is not just heat. It is safety, trust. No one has given me both, until you." Thomas felt a lump in his throat. "Then you better stay alive so you can get used to it." Outside, the hum grew louder again. Thomas's head snapped to the door. The hunters had found them. The latch rattled once, twice, then stopped. Through the crack of the boarded window, Thomas saw one of them standing in the snow. Its glowing faceplate stared at the station for a long, silent moment. Then it tilted its head, as if listening to something distant. A sharp whistle echoed through the trees, high-pitched and strange. The hunter turned away. One by one, the shadows in the storm faded, moving back toward the forest. The hum grew quieter, and then it was gone. Thomas didn't move until the storm swallowed every trace of their lights. Alren's voice broke the silence. "They have orders not to enter here. Perhaps old treaty, old border." Thomas exhaled slowly, tension draining from his shoulders. Guess we got lucky. He turned back to the stove, feeding the fire until the metal glowed bright red. The warmth spread slowly through the room, chasing away the chill. Alrin's breathing evened out, and some of the frost-like patterns on his skin softened. They sat there in silence for a while, the storm outside a dull roar. Thomas leaned back against the wall, exhaustion pulling at him, but he kept his eyes on Alrin. The alien looked different now, not just fragile, but alive in a way he hadn't before. Thomas, Alrin said suddenly, his voice quiet but steady. If I leave, they will follow again. But if I stay, I bring danger to you. Thomas shrugged. Then we deal with it together. Alrin tilted his head. Humans are strange. Yeah, Thomas said with a small smile. We get that. A lot. The fire crackled and the air grew warmer still. For the first time since that night began, Alrin's shoulders relaxed. His eyes closed, but not from weakness, from peace. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the hunter's tracks, hiding every sign of the chase. Inside, two figures sat by the fire, one human. One alien bound, not by orders or survival, but by the warmth they'd chosen to share. And in the quiet of that small weather station, Thomas knew something for certain. The world outside could turn to ice 1,000 times over. But he would keep Alrin warm, no matter how long it took.